Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Mireille Totobesola. I work for the Nutrition and Food Systems division at FAO, in headquarters in Rome. First of all, before I start, I would like to thank the president of the GPC and particularly also Mr. Andrew Jacobs for inviting me to present the work that we are doing to reduce loss and waste in different commodities, but more particularly in pulses supply chain. So I'll present some background information on the global commitment. There was a mention of the Sustainable Development Goals already this morning. The challenges and opportunities in reducing loss and waste in pulses supply chain, and what FAO is doing to address these problems. I will also mention the major causes of post-harvest losses in pulses, the solutions and models, and the strategies and policies that we are promoting based on food loss analysis approach along the supply chains and taking food systems approach also. So I'll talk about the technical solutions, in particular the hermetic storage technologies that are being promoted to fight insect attack and also moisture. The models for sustainable investment and adoption of solutions, private sector's role in that work, the strategies and policies that we are developing in partnership with the government in different countries. And also I'll talk about our platform, the Community of Practice on Food Loss Reduction, for knowledge sharing and linkages among actors from the public and private sector. So this is just to once again mention that our work is actually in the framework of the UN Sustainable Development Goal SDG 12.3, which is to halve per capita global food waste and reduce food loss along supply chains, including post-harvest losses by 2030. Losses and waste in pulses, what are the challenges and opportunities? As mentioned also many times during this day, pulses contribute to food and nutrition security, but also smallholders' income. And smallholders are really our target population, being the UN agency working on fighting hunger and poverty and other objectives. We have mentioned also the growing demand for pulses. I mentioned yesterday when I met with the executive members that committee members that really we've been talking a lot about production and productivity, but we haven't talked much about the losses, the post-harvest losses. And if we are to really increase the supply, we need to address also these losses that are quite high. I'm not going to mention the statistics because there are going to be new statistics published this year in the FAO SOFA publication that is going to be published by October this year. It's the status of food and agriculture, and it's going to be on food loss and waste this year. So there will be new statistics, but in general, really losses can be even 100% in some cases for coffee, for example, when it is not stored in hermetic conditions. And the need, the causes are at micro, producers level, stakeholders level, meso in terms of organization, deficiencies or lack of efficiencies, and macro level in terms of regulatory framework, policies, and so on. So engaging with the government and decision makers at higher level. So there is a need to identify, promote, facilitate access and investment in feasible solutions, sustainable models, how to engage with different stakeholders, including the private sector, how to collaborate with you all, the strategy and policy recommendations that we can make in different contexts. So as it's been said also many times, these are contextual, so we really need to know system-wise who are the actors present to be able to say which solutions or strategies would work in a given condition. This is just to show you what FAO is doing. We have done a lot of food loss analysis to identify the critical loss points so as to invest in these critical loss points along supply chains. As you know, in the development world, funding is limited, so, and the government as well have so many important other priorities to address, so we really need to prioritize our interventions and work towards these critical loss points, addressing the causes by recommending feasible solutions, as I said earlier. FAO does a lot of data and information, data collection and information. As you may know, FAO is in charge of collecting the data from member countries to determine the global food loss index. So that is going to be all of the statistics that they collect, including the ones that are generated from the private sector, using models sometimes, but directly collecting data also from the different member countries. Capacity development in terms of training of trainers, partnerships and collaboration. It's been mentioned this morning, the collaboration that we have already with GPC and other partners from the private sector, work with academia, research, civil society, other development agencies, and so on. And I will show you what is being shared on the community of practice on food loss reduction at the end of my presentation. This is just to show you the different steps of the approach of the food loss analysis that FAO has been developing and applying applied in different countries for more than 80 studies of selected supply chains. So it's really about identifying the critical loss points and defining the solutions that are socially, technically, environmentally, and economically feasible. As I mentioned, this is with a supply chain approach, and I can even talk about systems approach. As you know, all of the, not only core supply chain actors need to be involved, but also the actors that are supporting the supply chains. And it's really engaging with the stakeholders in the field, in the production areas, so that we have ownership of what we are doing, what we are promoting. This is just to show you the map of the studies that we have been carrying out. Some of the reports are already published, others are available as working documents, so in case some of them are of interest to you, you can write to us and we can share with you the outcomes of the studies, the recommendations made by the experts. So you can see, beans, cowpea, and chickpea in India, some other studies. This is just to show the major causes of losses that we have identified, common major causes. So even at harvest, we can already observe poor practices such as early and delayed harvest due to lack of labor or difficult access to mechanization. Insects, when the crop is already infested from the field for being left there, birds, rodents, and so on. Transport also is causing losses when there is rough handling, poor, packaging materials, and so on. But the major, really, the critical loss points usually are at drying and on-farm storage and warehouses at community level. That's when it's caused by insufficient drying. As you know, producers oftentimes only use empirical means to define losses, to define the right moisture when they think the crop is well dried, it's by biting the grain, or sometimes they've been trained using a bottle with salt inside, so that when the salt is humid, you can say if the grain is still humid or is good for storage. They don't have access most of the time to moisture meter and so on. Whereas there are moisture meters that are really cheap now, but they are not being promoted. As I said, insects, rodents, farm animals, and so on, rain, and that is causing, foreign matters, mold, and aflatoxin, which is really causing also public health, given that it's causing cancer not only for humans, but also for cattle and animals in general. On-farm storage, again, inadequate practices, management skills, no cleaning, no access to equipment. The equipment are usually non-hermetic. Infrastructure, they are using these traditional granaries that are not protecting the crop from moisture, mold, insects, and so on. So there is loss in quantity and also in quality. And also there are losses at the threshing and milling stages. And also we have observed losses caused by gender issues, which is really cross-cutting. Usually women play a major role in post-harvest management operations, and they, most of the time in the countries where we work, they do everything manually. They don't have access to mechanization. They are not motivated so much because they have so many other duties, and they don't see the income, which is mostly managed by men in the household. So as long as they're not really getting involved in the decision on the use of the revenue, some of them have told to us that they sometimes even leave part of the harvest in the field, and then they would come back to get some of it and sell themselves. So one might count that as losses, but still, I mean, it's something to look at. This is just to show you the conditions in which the pulses or grains in general are being stored in the countries where we work. And the traditional granaries, sometimes it's also stored in kitchens so that the smoke is helping in protecting from the insects, but that is very limited protection. This is to show you the gender issues. Everything is done manually most of the time. Even the harvesting, threshing, winnowing, everything. These are some of the solutions. Drying in different contexts, in different agroecological zones. The first picture is, for example, a small device for drying to protect from rain in DRC, where it's very humid. So there is really a need to protect the crop the grains when it's raining. Use of tarpaulins, use of cribs. But I would like to really emphasize on the promotion of hermetic technologies, hermetic bags, metal and plastic silos, as this is really the reasons why I'm here today, because of the interest that was shown by the GPC member who was at the World Purses Day at FAO, mentioning that there is really a need to promote these technologies and to talk about it to you all also as part of the actors of the supply chains. So I'd like to talk about the hermetic bags, which, I mean, maybe some of you already have heard of them, composed of the two gas-proof or airtight inner bag placed in another bag, so that's why it's sometimes called triple liner bags. It's really airtight, so it protects against insects and moisture. And the same principle of hermeticity is also applied and used in metal and plastic silos, plastic drums, they might be called as well. Some of them are used for water, like container for water, when they are not designed for grains, but still protecting grains against insects, rodents, and so on. The grain safe and cocoon, which are also hermetic storage, but bigger size. You might have heard of them. They're a lot, most of the time used for by larger smallholders, producers organizations, and also in other contexts like warehouses that WFP has, the World Food Program has, in different emergency situations where they work with suppliers, the traders that are present in countries to actually commercialize grains, to procure grains, and actually sell to emergency situation to the customers. These are some of the bags that I've mentioned before. So more information is available on the link that I've provided. The PICS bag, the first picture is a PICS bag, which is the hermetic bag designed by Purdue University, Illinois also. It's in Ethiopia, but it's been quite used for, let's say, the last 20 years in West Africa now. These are the bigger bags that I mentioned. If you notice, I put in red here the unit cost of a hermetic bag of 50 to 100 kilos. So really, for 1 metric tons, you would have, the producer would have an investment of $20 US, and that is really nothing compared to the value of that crop if it is lost completely because of weevil or any other insects or rodents. And it can be used, in terms of lifespan, it can be reused twice if it's handled properly. These are the hermetic silos that I mentioned before. They are made sometimes by artisans when there are no manufacturers in country. In Uganda, for example, there are industries. I think they are Indians who make these plastic improved silos, and the other one that are metal silos. As you can see, the shape allows for stacking them to deliver them in remote areas. So that would reduce the cost of transportation to the smallholders. And the other ones are made by artisans that we found our partners are training so that they can build some of these. But they have challenges in terms of accessing the right materials to build these silos. The welding and everything needs to be available in country for them to be able to build these metal silos. And sometimes they don't use the right materials, but still it's always better than the traditional granaries that you saw before. So we are promoting this in these conditions as well. This is just to show you that these technologies and these initiatives are actually not new. The Swiss have been promoting this in Latin America. This is a project implemented by Swiss Contact back in 1983 to 2009 in Central America. It involved 5 countries, and it's really something that is engaging with private sector, and in terms of quality and certification and everything, it's been a good project as well. And now it's really running by itself, and these manufacturers, like small, medium enterprises making silos, are really providing the equipment as they are on the market and having everything, having been trained and so on. The same, the Swiss government is also funding the project that I'm managing, which involved the free roam-based agencies, FAO, of course, and the World Food Program, and IFAD, the Financial Institution for Agriculture and Development in Rome. This is just to show you the price difference depending on the context in which we work, of different silos, of different capacities. You can see that these are data Uganda, Kenya, Malawi, Zambia, and Zimbabwe, and you can tell that in some countries it's quite expensive, whereas in other contexts it's less expensive. So when we do the profitability and promote these silos, we also take in account these differences in cost. This is a slide just to show you what we have observed in terms of determining factors, in terms of supply and demand for this equipment. For the supply, for those who are really supplying the market to the smallholders and other stakeholders involved in this, the use of this equipment, really one of the determining factors is the social and technical factors, which is the awareness of the existing solutions. Most of the time, people have never heard of these technologies. In the Democratic Republic of Congo, where we started working with the joint project 5 years ago, nobody have heard of the hermetic storage. And it's something that is already available in the neighboring countries. So we have promoted the hermetic bags. We brought to DRC to just introduce the technology and see how much it would cost, taking into account the taxes and transport costs and everything, to see if some of the development programs and private sectors would be able to actually promote it and then inform about it to the final users. So it's important, as it is mentioned here, that there is availability and accessibility of the materials for building the equipment. As I said before, the skills to make them for the artisans, know-how, the logistics, marketing, and entrepreneurial skills. But most of all, it is important to also look at the economic feasibility and profitability, particularly for artisans, but also for these small businesses, as I showed earlier, involved in supplying or manufacturing this equipment. Distributors, importers, distributors in remote areas. What would be the profitability? Really, there is no adoption or development of this business if it is not profitable. And most of the time, when we introduce this equipment, we subsidize them. But the actors who would be involved in this needs to know if there is no subsidies, if we are out of the country, the UN agencies and development agencies, how much this, what would be the profitability for this? Otherwise, it's not sustainable. All our work would not be sustainable. The transport cost, as I mentioned before, the taxes applied to these equipment or the materials to build them, the incentives, norms and standards for the grains to be stored in there, but also for the materials for the equipment themselves, quality control. I mentioned yesterday when I presented this, the fake hermetic bags that are on the market, which is really harmful. It's disrupting because when you have these bags on the market and you have the good quality bags, then it's really damaging for not only for the suppliers, for the businesses, because once the producers have tested the technology and they get fake bags and they still incur losses, then they would not reinvest in the hermetic bags anymore. Then there would not be trust anymore. So this is a role for the government to take on to ensure that there is quality control. Otherwise, it's not going to be sustainable. In terms of demand and investment, as determining factors, there would not be demand if we don't inform and train the users, the final users, who are the producers and their organizations. So they need to be trained in the moisture content, because even if we promote these technologies, if they store grains that are not being dried enough, there will be molding and all of that issues. If the grain is not clean, even if they invest in the technology, they would still be selling bad quality grains, and that would not be of interest to the traders other buyers, potential buyers, processors, and so on. So there is a need to train them. There is a need to train them in management skills for the storage management. The use of the equipment, when we talk about hermetic technologies, that doesn't ring a bell for some of the users, the end users. If you don't explain, you should not open the bag. It needs to be airtight, so once you close it, you open it only for selling, and so on. So this needs to be understood, otherwise they would not use it the way it should be used, and then they will still incur losses and so on. So this information and training is really something that we've been doing in our project, but as you know, all projects have a lifetime, and when it's ending, if the private sector or government extension services, when they exist, if those partners, those stakeholders do not take on and continue facilitating trainings or even lending for the investment or including that in the price that they're offering, then there is no buying, there is no adoption at scale. So this is something that the private sector really can take on so that they get good quality and quantity when they procure grains, they procure purses. So again, economic feasibility and profitability for the users on the demand side. As I said, they need to know what is the loss reduction actually if they use this compared to their usual practices. What is the increase in market price, since they would be able to store in good conditions for a certain time until lean season or until the supply is so low that they can fetch higher price. What would be their income in that? So that would trigger demand. And there is a need for the buyers, traders, or processors to also recognize that farmers would be motivated if there is a differential in terms of prices offered to them when they invest in these equipment. Otherwise, if they get the same price for people who do not invest in this equipment and they invest in it, there is no motivation to adopt them. Lifespan, all of the, factors here are important. There are robust equipment like the silos compared to, the bags. As long as they understand, I think, which one is useful for them. If they have rodents or, other issues, maybe they should invest in the silos that are more robust than the bags, but still the bags are more accessible in terms of price and so on. So it's a decision that they can make based on the information that we provide to them. This is just to show you in different contexts the business models that we have. So engaging with the private sector, as I said, in different ways. This is another business model. These links you can look at them if you have the PowerPoint presentation. So different business models in different countries. The strategies at continental level, mentioning the engagement with the private sector, markets. The principle for all stakeholders about subsidies, about the need to give access to finance, and so on, that different public and private sector actors are really agreeing on. So the presentation is about all of this, and all of this information is available on our platform, which is the Community of Practice on Food Loss Reduction, which is quite used by the private sector in here. We have more than 1,500 registered members. These are big events that are coming up in September in Addis Ababa. So in case you are interested in participating, it's the second All-Africa Congress and exhibition on post-harvest losses. The last one, there was 700 participants. So I think this would be a good event for all of you if you can attend. Partners, the links I've been mentioning, and the contacts in our team. Thank you so much for your attention.